The sun was already sinking behind the jagged Arizona mesas when the scream cut through the dry evening air, sharp enough to make every horse in the corral rear and snort, sharp enough to stop Elijah Mercer mid-step with one boot still off the ground. The rancher had lived his whole life on this land, had learned to read the wind the way other men read books, and he knew that sound instantly. Not the cry of a coyote, not the panic of a spooked animal, but the raw, human sound of pain and terror braided together. He turned toward the arroyos that split the land beyond his fence, heart pounding, dust clinging to his sweat-darkened shirt, and then he saw her stumbling out of the scrub like a wounded deer, her long black hair tangled with burrs, one hand pressed hard against her thigh as blood soaked through the deerskin fabric. She was Apache. He recognized her immediately, not just by the beaded patterns on her clothing, but by the way she carried herself even in agony, spine straight, jaw clenched, eyes fierce and refusing to dim. She took 3 more steps before her legs buckled, and Elijah dropped everything and ran. The rattlesnake lay coiled behind her in the brush, thick-bodied and angry, its warning still buzzing in the air like a curse, and Elijah crushed its head with a rock without thinking, the act automatic, drilled into him by decades of survival, in a land that did not forgive hesitation. When he reached her, she was already on the ground, breath coming in ragged gasps, fingers digging into the dirt as if she were trying to hold on to the earth itself. "Rancher," she whispered, her voice strained but steady, her dark eyes locking onto his with a force that felt like a command more than a plea. "Please, get the poison out." The words hit him harder than the scream had. Everyone on the frontier knew the old belief: cut and suck, draw the venom before it spread. But Elijah also knew what the doctors in town said, knew the dangers, knew the rules, and yet as he looked at the spreading purple-black stain creeping up her thigh, he understood there was no time for rules, no time for distance or old grudges between his people and hers. He tore open his canteen and poured water over the wound, his hands steady despite the storm rising in his chest, and she flinched but did not cry out. "What's your name?" he asked, more to anchor her than himself. "Nita," she said, teeth clenched, "daughter of Tomas Red Willow." The name landed heavy. Tomas Red Willow was a respected elder, a man who had never trusted white ranchers, a man who had warned his people to keep their distance from Elijah Mercer's land. Fate, it seemed, had no interest in such boundaries. Elijah took out his knife, the blade catching the dying light, and hesitated for half a breath. A lifetime in moments like this before, slicing a clean incision where the fangs had pierced her skin. Blood welled up immediately, dark and hot, and without another thought he pressed his mouth to the wound and drew, spitting out the bitter taste of iron and venom again and again until his jaw ached and his lungs burned. Nita's hand found his shoulder, gripping hard, not in weakness, but in grounding, as if she were reminding them both that she was still there, still fighting. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath. Elijah could feel the land watching, the spirits his grandmother used to speak of whispering through the sage and dust, testing him. When he finally pulled back, his mouth numb and his head spinning, he bound the wound tightly with a strip torn from his shirt, then lifted her with care, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile life could be even in someone so strong. He carried her toward the ranch house as the sky bled into deep reds and purples, every step a promise he didn't know if he could keep. Inside, he laid her on the wooden table where he'd once stitched up his own hand after a barbed wire accident, and he worked through the night, cooling her fever, whispering to her when the pain dragged her under and pulled her back again. She spoke in fragments then, words in Apache and English tangled together, memories of her mother's songs, warnings from her father, dreams of running across open plains without fear. Elijah listened to all of it, though he understood only pieces, because listening felt like the only thing he could offer beyond his hands. As the hours crawled by, doubt gnawed at him. Had he done enough? Had he done the right thing? Would she live to see another sunrise, or would the venom claim her despite his efforts? Just before dawn, when exhaustion weighed on him like stone, her breathing finally evened out, and the fever broke, leaving her pale but alive. Elijah sank into a chair, head in his hands, feeling something inside him shift, something old and rigid cracking open. This land had taught him survival, had hardened him, but that night it taught him something else, that lines drawn by fear and history could be crossed, that mercy could be as instinctive as violence. As the first light crept through the window and painted Nita's face in gold, Elijah looked toward the horizon and knew this was only the beginning, that saving her life would cost him far more than blood and sleep. And as you listen to this story unfold, remember that stories like this live because people choose to hear them. So if you feel the weight of this moment, if your heart beats a little faster with every word, subscribe to this channel and walk with us through every chapter, every test, every truth that the desert is about to reveal. When Elijah Mercer finally stepped outside into the pale morning light, the desert looked deceptively calm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if a young woman had not hovered between life and death on his kitchen table only hours before. The air was cool, carrying the scent of creosote and dust, and for a moment he simply stood there, staring at the horizon, trying to steady the storm inside his chest. Behind him, inside the ranch house, Nita lay sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady, the fever gone but her body still locked in a hard battle. Elijah had seen men survive worse injuries, and others die from wounds that seemed small, and the uncertainty gnawed at him more than any physical labor ever had. He washed the dried blood from his hands at the basin, the water turning pink and then clear, and with every drop he felt the weight of what he had done settle deeper into his bones. When the sun rose higher, he saddled his horse and rode hard toward the trading post, knowing he needed antivenom if there was any chance to truly save her. The ride felt endless, the ground blurring beneath pounding hooves, memories flashing through his mind. His father warning him never to involve himself in Apache affairs, the stories of violence whispered by both sides, the unspoken rule that distance meant safety. But distance had vanished the moment Nita collapsed at his feet, and there was no going back. At the post, the clerk looked at him with surprise when he demanded the medicine, surprise turning to suspicion when Elijah said it was for an Apache woman. Words were exchanged, sharp and ugly, and for a heartbeat Elijah thought fists might fly, but he slammed coins onto the counter with a force that ended the argument. By the time he rode back, the sun was already high, heat shimmering over the land like a warning. Inside the house, Nita had woken. Her eyes tracked him as he entered, sharp despite the pain, and she struggled to sit up until he gently pressed her back down. He explained what he'd done, what he was going to do, his voice low and steady, and she listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she nodded once. "You risk much," she said quietly. "For me." Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude, uncomfortable with the truth that he had not thought of risk at all. He administered the antivenom carefully, his hands sure, and then there was nothing to do but wait. Hours stretched into an uneasy afternoon, the house filled with silence broken only by the creak of wood and the distant call of hawks. Nita spoke again as the pain eased, telling him about her people, about her father Tomas Red Willow, about the warnings she had ignored when she crossed near his land, searching for lost horses. She admitted she had feared him, the lone rancher with a reputation for stubbornness and strength, and Elijah found himself smiling sadly at that. He told her his own story in return, of being born on this land, of losing his mother young, of learning early that the desert did not care who you were or where you came from. Somewhere in those exchanges, Something fragile and unexpected took root: trust. It did not erase the past, did not pretend history had been kind, but it stood between them like a bridge built plank by plank. That bridge was tested before nightfall. Dust appeared on the horizon, then riders, Apache men, faces hard with worry and anger, led by Tomas Red Willow himself. Elijah stepped out onto the porch before they reached the house, hands visible, heart pounding. Words were exchanged again, this time heavier, charged with fear and accusation. Tomas demanded to see his daughter, his eyes burning with suspicion, and Elijah stepped aside without protest. Inside, Nita called out, her voice weak but clear, and when her father saw her alive, truly alive, something in his expression broke open. He knelt by her side, gripping her hand, murmuring prayers in their language, then slowly turned his gaze on Elijah. The silence that followed felt like standing beneath a storm cloud. Finally, Tomas spoke, his voice low but steady. He acknowledged the debt, acknowledged the life saved, but he did not pretend that years of mistrust vanished in a single night. Elijah accepted that. He did not ask for thanks, did not ask for forgiveness. What mattered was that Nita lived. As the Apache group prepared to leave, Tomas paused at the doorway. "The land watches," he said. "It remembers who honors life." With that, they were gone, carrying Nita back to her people once she was strong enough to travel. The ranch felt emptier afterward, quieter than before, and Elijah wondered if that bridge would collapse now that distance returned. Days passed, then weeks, and one evening as the sun sank low and painted the mesas red, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of his land. Nita, standing tall, healed, her eyes bright. She had come not just to thank him, she said, but to speak of new paths, of cooperation instead of fear, of shared respect for a land that belonged fully to no one. Elijah listened, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside him. The rattlesnake's bite had been an ending, yes, but also a beginning, one that reshaped not just two lives, but the fragile space between two worlds. And as this story closes, remember that every powerful story continues because someone chooses to listen again. So if you believe in courage, compassion, and the strength to cross old divides, subscribe to this channel and stay with us, because more unforgettable stories are waiting just ahead.